I was down in the freezing, damp basement of our Victorian fixer-upper. I was covered in 80-year-old dust, trying to locate the source of a plumbing leak, because my husband, Jackson, was upstairs, too busy curating his real estate investor aesthetic on Instagram to pick up a wrench. He was filming his day 45 of our luxury flip reels, pointing a ring light at exposed wiring he had no idea how to fix. I wedged a steel crowbar behind a piece of water-damaged drywall. I pulled back with all my weight. I heard a sickening crack. The plaster gave way. It rained debris onto the cracked concrete floor. But it wasn't just old insulation that tumbled out of the hollow wall cavity. A black moleskin notebook hit the ground with a heavy thud. It was wrapped tight in industrial plastic. The betrayal didn't come with a cinematic confrontation. It didn't arrive as a late-night text from a mistress. It came in the form of raw, handwritten data. For 39 grueling weeks, I had poured every ounce of my corporate salary and my trust fund into purchasing this sprawling, dilapidated estate. Jackson had begged me to invest. He love-bombed me with Pinterest boards and delusional promises of our forever home. I knelt on the cold floor and unwrapped the plastic. The air in the cellar smelled of black mold and deceit. I opened the notebook. My vision narrowed. I hyper-focused on the neat accounting columns inside. A high-pitched metallic ringing erupted inside my inner ear. It drowned out the rhythmic, echoing drip of the copper pipe overhead. Jackson was a man whose personality was copy-pasted from hustle culture podcasts. He rented luxury cars for weekend content. He used words like synergy without knowing what they meant. He relied on his mother, Brenda, to navigate basic adulthood. Brenda was the unfiltered definition of a toxic boy mom. She ran a 2G overpriced antique shop downtown that was constantly teetering on bankruptcy. Her shop was a dark cavern of haunted-looking porcelain dolls and chalk-painted sideboards no one under 60 actually wanted to buy. She smelled of stale lavender and cheap Chardonnay. She treated my high-level career as a senior architectural archivist like I was organizing dusty library books for fun. When we closed on the house, Jackson insisted on personally managing the $500,000 renovation budget. He claimed he secured an exclusive, high-end private contractor named Garrison. Garrison supposedly did work for local celebrities. For months, I watched Garrison's sketchy crew tear through the historic property, and I argued with Jackson repeatedly about the trashy quality of the materials. He gaslit me every single time. He told me I just didn't understand the modern market vibe. The black notebook held all the actual receipts. Garrison was not a licensed contractor. He was a random handyman Brenda found on Facebook Marketplace. The registered LLC receiving my bi-weekly renovation payouts was legally owned 100% by Brenda. They were buying the cheapest clearance bin materials from big box hardware stores. Then they slapped a premium price tag on the invoices they handed me. My husband and his mother were running a fake, sloppy shell corporation. They were siphoning my life savings directly into her Flope-era antique business to keep it afloat. The notebook detailed their pathetic strategy. They were spending pennies on toxic cosmetic cover-ups. They glued fake, gray, luxury vinyl plank flooring over rotting historical floorboards. They hid major electrical hazards behind cheap drywall. They ignored the failing, cracked foundation. The final page made my blood turn to freezing lead. Written in Jackson's chaotic handwriting was their exit strategy. Once the trashy renovations were complete, he was going to get the house artificially appraised at double its value. Then he would blindside me with divorce papers. He planned to force a rapid sale, take half of the fabricated equity, and leave me tethered to the staggering construction debt. The physical sensation of life-altering shock is a strange glitch in the human system. My skin went numb. A rush of icy static flooded my veins. My jaw locked so tightly, the muscles in my neck physically ached. They believed I was just some oblivious, aesthetic-obsessed wife. They thought I would sign bank authorizations without looking beneath the surface. They had no idea. They just casually invited a forensic apex predator into their fragile little ecosystem. I rewrapped the notebook in its plastic casing. I slid it back into the hollow wall. I sealed the gap with plaster dust. I didn't march upstairs. I didn't scream at him. Confronting a narcissist only gives them the opportunity to spin a new, exhausting web of lies. Instead, I wiped the dirt from my jeans. I drove to my downtown office. I locked the heavy oak door. Jackson and Brenda were chronically online. They were so obsessed with flipping the house for a quick profit, they ignored the actual ground the house was built on. They operated without proper city permits. They relied on the fact that the estate had sat abandoned for over a decade. But I knew the buried municipal zoning laws of this city better than anyone on the eastern seaboard. I spent 3 sleepless nights cross-referencing obscure property lines and forgotten heritage registries. I drank toxic amounts of black coffee. I uncovered exactly what I needed. Our estate was not just a creepy old house. It was built directly over the foundational ruins of a 17th century colonial meeting house. It was legally eligible for the highest, most restrictive tier of federal historical preservation. This specific status ruthlessly prohibited any structural alteration. It banned modern additions. It outlawed the removal of original materials without expensive, specialized, government-approved oversight. I didn't stop them from ruining the house. Honestly, I low-key encouraged it. I smiled at Jackson over our overpriced takeout. I casually suggested that ripping out the load-bearing wall between the parlor and the dining room would dramatically increase the natural light for his video tours. I stood there, sipping my iced matcha with dead, unblinking eyes. I watched Brenda supervise her handyman tearing out irreplaceable 18th century stained glass windows. They replaced them with energy-efficient plastic panels. They wanted the millennial gray flip, the sterile, soulless aesthetic that turns historic homes into dentist waiting rooms. With every swing of their rented sledgehammers, they were digging a multi-million-dollar grave. While they destroyed the historical integrity of the property, I went to work. I quietly filed a mountain of expedited, rock-solid paperwork with the National Heritage Commission. I weaponized my elite professional credentials to permanently lock the estate into the Federal Preservation Registry. And the best part? I legally transferred the primary liability of all active, undocumented construction permits entirely into the name of Brenda's fraudulent LLC. I cited a conflict of interest at my own firm. Jackson was blinded by his delusional impending payday. He eagerly signed the transfer documents without reading a single paragraph. The grand finale of their unserious scheme was an intimate appraisal brunch. They hosted it in our newly ruined, sterile millennial gray kitchen. Jackson invited a ruthless real estate broker to walk through the property. He intended to list the house the very next morning. Brenda arrived wearing a tailored blazer she definitely couldn't afford. She held a glass of imported mimosa. She acted exactly like the main character of a hit reality show. She was high on her own fabricated supply. "The open concept is giving such a fresh, elevated vibe, Cassidy," Brenda drawled. She tapped her acrylic nails against the composite quartz countertop. "You were so stubbornly attached to those depressing historical rooms. But Jackson has a visionary eye for luxury. This property is going to shatter the neighborhood comps." I stood near the stainless steel refrigerator. I felt the steady, terrifying rhythm of my pulse at the base of my throat. The air smelled of fresh paint and toxic off-gassing from the laminate flooring. "It is a breathtaking transformation, Brenda," I replied. My voice was flat. It was devoid of recognizable emotion. "You and Jackson have left a permanent mark on this historic property." Jackson puffed out his chest. He wrapped an arrogant arm around his mother's shoulders. He looked at the broker with a smug, triumphant grin. He was mentally spending the millions he believed he was about to steal. The brass knocker on the front door echoed through the hollow house. The sound was sharp. It cracked like a definitive gunshot in a frozen forest. Jackson strolled to the entryway. He pulled open the heavy door. The camera-ready smile was instantly deleted from his face. Standing on our pristine new porch were three severe individuals. They wore windbreakers bearing the intimidating seal of the Federal Historical Commission. They were accompanied by the city's chief structural inspector. The lead federal agent was a tall man with a clipboard and eyes like polished flint. He stepped over the threshold without waiting for an invitation. The Instagram-perfect atmosphere in the kitchen evaporated into a freezing vacuum. Jackson Sterling? And Brenda Sterling, representing Apex Contracting LLC? The agent asked. His voice boomed through the ruined parlor. We are executing an immediate, non-negotiable cease and desist order on this property. You are in direct violation of the Federal Heritage Protection Act. Brenda's mimosa glass slipped from her fingers. It shattered against the laminate floor. It splashed sticky orange liquid across her leather shoes. What are you talking about? This is a private residential flip. We own this house. The city inspector stepped forward. He looked around the millennial-grade kitchen with profound disgust. You own a CLASA-protected federal landmark, ma'am. And according to our visual assessment, you have illegally destroyed over 40% of its protected architectural integrity. Jackson began to hyperventilate. His skin turned a sickly, translucent white. He looked frantically at me. His eyes were wide with a suffocating panic. He desperately wanted me to fix it. He wanted me to use my industry connections to make the men in the windbreakers disappear. But I simply remained leaning against the refrigerator. I quietly watched the destruction of his ego with chilling serenity. The penalties for unauthorized demolition of a Class A heritage site are severe and non-negotiable, the federal agent continued coldly. He handed an intimidating stack of stamped legal documents into Jackson's paralyzed hands. You are hereby fined 300% of the original property value for the documented damages. Furthermore, Apex Contracting LLC and the primary permit holder are legally mandated to completely restore this property to its exact, original historical condition. And you must use period-accurate materials and specialized union labor at your own expense. The crushing weight of the mathematics finally landed in their brains. Brenda let out a choked wheeze. She clutched her chest as if she had been struck by a vehicle. They had stolen $500,000 to do cheap, fake renovations. And they were now personally on the hook for over $3 million in federal fines and mandatory, specialized historical reconstruction. Cassidy, Jackson choked out. His voice cracked into a high-pitched whine. Tell them you are an archivist. Tell them we didn't know. We can just sell it as is. We can file for bankruptcy, right? You cannot sell a condemned federal heritage site, Jackson, I said quietly. My voice sliced through the dust-filled air like a scalpel. And federal preservation mandates cannot be discharged in personal bankruptcy. You signed the primary contractor liabilities exactly 2 weeks ago. You and your mother are legally tethered to this house until every single piece of that original mahogany is flawlessly replaced. The real estate broker practically sprinted out the back door. He was desperate to avoid the radioactive legal fallout. Brenda collapsed into one of the modern dining chairs. She buried her face in her trembling hands. She sobbed as her fabricated boss babe reality disintegrated into worthless ash. I walked past my paralyzed, delusional husband. My shoes crunched over the shattered glass of his mother's dropped drink. I paused in the grand entryway. I looked back at them standing in the center of the hollow, echoing house they had so greedily destroyed. They thought they could strip an antique down to its studs, paint over the rot, and pass it off as a masterpiece. But when you rip out the load-bearing pillars of a foundation just to build a cheap illusion, you don't get a luxury flip. You just get to be the one standing inside when the roof finally caves in. I walked out the front door, into the bright sunlight, leaving them buried alive in their own millennial gray tomb.